It began with an envelope, sealed, official, and hand-delivered to Elon Musk's private residence in Boca Chica, Texas. The insignia on the wax seal bore the emblem of the United Nations, and the words beneath it were unmistakably urgent. Classified, Level 7 security. Inside was a letter addressed to Musk himself, signed by the Secretary General. It was neither a threat nor a request. It was a direct warning. The letter referenced a growing international concern about Musk's latest project, an autonomous orbital network codenamed Ouroboros, which reportedly had the potential to render national surveillance systems obsolete and give one private entity access to real-time data of nearly every human being on Earth. According to the UN, this system could destabilize not just nations, but civilization itself. There was no press release, no social media posts, no televised statement. Musk read the letter in silence, set it down beside his breakfast burrito, and resumed sketching on his touchscreen tablet. 3 hours later, the only sign of acknowledgement came from a SpaceX launch pad. A prototype satellite bearing the Ouroboros insignia launched into low orbit. The world noticed. Commentators on international news networks speculated wildly. Some declared Musk a global threat, a man too powerful to be constrained by borders. Others called him a visionary, a necessary disruptor in a broken geopolitical system. But the man at the center of it all? He didn't blink. In a closed-door meeting with his executive team, he simply said, "They fear what they can't control. We're not breaking the system. We're building what comes after." Outside, the skies over Texas shimmered with the contrail of a new age, and the rest of the world held its breath. Great. I've written the story's first prompt in American English under the title, "While headlines screamed across the world, behind closed doors, the tension thickened like fog." Inside a minimalist glass conference room at Neuralink headquarters, Musk stood before a sleek, translucent display that flickered with live satellite imagery, neural interface data, and a real-time world sentiment heat map. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't panicked. He was silent. His executive team sat around the oval table. Engineers, ethicists, legal advisors, all waiting for a word. Finally, Shivani, the head of Neural Policy Strategy, broke the silence. "They've given us 72 hours to explain ourselves, or they'll call for international sanctions." Musk's eyes stayed locked on the data. "Explain ourselves to whom?" he said flatly. "To the same institutions that failed to predict pandemics, climate collapse, AI acceleration? The same ones trying to put the genie back in the bottle now that it's out?" The room was quiet again. Tension swirled with awe. The man wasn't just confronting the United Nations, he was challenging the entire global framework of authority. What the UN saw as dangerous overreach, Musk saw as moral obligation. His latest breakthrough, NeuroSync, a brain interface network that could connect human cognition to high-bandwidth data streams, was already being deployed in remote hospitals, crisis zones, and education deserts. It wasn't about control, it was about access, empowerment. But the implications were too seismic to ignore. Could a single private citizen really develop something that sidestepped sovereign infrastructure entirely? Did it make him a liberator? Or something else? Miles away, in a high-security UN chamber, diplomats debated in anxious tones. Terms like digital sovereignty, mental autonomy, and ethical warfare ricocheted off oak-paneled walls. Musk's project had already integrated with 17% of sub-Saharan clinics. Without a licensing model? Without oversight. Back in California, Musk finally turned to the team. "Let them make noise," he said, voice low. "We're not violating laws. We're rewriting the purpose of them." His son, X, leaned against the far wall, eyes wide with wonder. He'd watched his father build rockets and design AI, but this was different. This wasn't just technology. It was defiance, stitched with vision. And Musk knew one thing above all. If the world's institutions were built to prevent disruption, then disruption had no choice but to outgrow them. 3 days later, a courier arrived at Musk's Starbase facility in Boca Chica. He carried a leather-bound envelope embossed with the UN insignia and marked "Confidential, Eyes Only." The envelope was handed to the security gate, logged digitally, and placed in a clear tray labeled "Non-Essential." It was never opened. Instead, Musk stood beneath the towering frame of his next-generation orbital shuttle, Artemis 1, directing engineers on load balancing. Dust swirled in the coastal wind. His boots crunched on steel grating as he moved like a man with hours, not weeks. The UN letter contained an ultimatum: cease all deployment of neurosync tech, or face global sanctions and restriction of all cooperative space missions. But Musk already knew what it said. Not because someone had told him, but because history was painfully predictable. He didn't need another warning dressed in bureaucracy. He needed the world to evolve. Meanwhile, inside the Geneva Assembly Hall, UN delegates argued behind frosted glass. Nations were divided. Some called Musk a savior, others a sovereign threat. China's ambassador demanded a full halt to Neuralink exports. Norway's delegate asked a far more terrifying question. What happens when more people trust Elon Musk than their own government? That was the real issue. Not the tech, not the law, the trust. Back at Starbase, X watched as his father took a private call on an encrypted line. A soft blue holographic display hovered in the air. Neural analytics, global adoption curves, emotional response mapping. The data showed something no UN report could. People weren't afraid. They were hopeful. In Rwanda, a boy with a degenerative neural disorder had just written his name for the first time using neurosync. In Peru, an isolated village received instant language translation via cognitive uplink. The headlines talked about sovereignty. The people talked about miracles. And Elon? He didn't slow down. He didn't blink. He simply turned to X and said, "Son, when they don't understand the tool, they call it a weapon." From that moment, something shifted, not just in the air, but in the architecture of global power. For the first time in decades, a single man wasn't answering to a world order. The world order was reacting to him. Behind closed doors in New York, the Security Council convened under urgent protocol. A digital projection of Elon Musk's neural grid system floated above the mahogany table. A lattice of interconnected minds from over 20 countries already beta testing the neurosync implant. "He's created a parallel infrastructure," said the French ambassador. "Communication, education, even emotional regulation. This isn't technology. It's governance." "He's bypassing us," added the German representative. "Not with force, with influence." In the center of the room, Secretary General Lemaire rubbed her temples. "And we let it happen. Because it worked." A silence fell over the room. On one hand, Musk's technology had restored mobility to paraplegic war veterans. On the other, some whispered of a dangerous dependence, children learning through AI-fed cognition rather than traditional schooling, political dissidents protected by real-time emotion cloaking, even isolated regions growing ideologically aligned with Neuralink's user code rather than national constitutions. It wasn't science fiction anymore. It was a silent revolution. Back in Texas, Musk met with his closest engineers in a secure subterranean chamber. The room resembled a clean lab mixed with a war room. Data walls glowed with social sentiment graphs. and decision tree models forecasting global behavior. Musk circled a table, speaking without theatrics. "They think I want to replace governments. I don't," he said. "Then what do you want?" asked an engineer. Musk paused. "To make them unnecessary." The team didn't flinch. They knew the stakes. Outside, protesters clashed with supporters near SpaceX headquarters. "No to neural chains!" screamed one banner. "Free thought through Musk!" answered another. News helicopters hovered above, capturing a polarized nation and a planet teetering between awe and apprehension. That same night, a digital message was anonymously leaked to global media. It was Musk's private notes, his blueprint for neural sovereignty, a plan where identity, currency, education, and justice could be run entirely on the brain-to-cloud infrastructure. There were no passwords, no presidents, just pure cognition. And while governments scrambled to suppress the leak, the world's attention shifted. It wasn't about Elon Musk, the man, anymore. It was about the idea, the question that terrified world leaders most. What if people chose it? The leak was no accident. Within hours, the term neural sovereignty trended globally. News anchors, tech influencers, human rights activists, everyone had an opinion, but no one had control. Musk hadn't just released a technical manifesto, he had lit the fuse on a philosophical war. In Seoul, teenage coders began building open-source derivatives of the neural interface, using nothing more than Musk's diagrams and open protocols. In Nairobi, local clinics reported patients volunteering to beta-test brain-computer links in exchange for access to Musk's remote education networks. In São Paulo, a single Neuralink node allowed an entire slum district to share power, medicine schedules, and even emotional check-ins in real time. Governments were baffled. What started as a tech controversy had become a grassroots awakening. It wasn't Musk's device they feared, it was the choice. Inside a darkened strategy room at the Pentagon, a cyber intelligence operative pointed at a glowing map of neural activity. "He's built a digital consciousness," she said. "We can't outcode him, but we may still out-narrate him." And so the whisper campaign began. Leaked rumors. Musk's chip causes hallucinations. Neuralink connected a baby to a drone. Elon is building a God protocol. Major outlets, driven by subtle influence and old alliances, flooded the infosphere with doubt. Not with facts, just enough smoke to distract from the fire. But Musk didn't respond. He didn't tweet. He didn't speak. He just built faster. Deep in his AI bunker in Nevada, he was training the next phase. Alethea, a truth-decoding algorithm. While the world argued about Neuralink, Alethea would be trained to detect misinformation in real-time brainwave signals. If it succeeded, it would be the first AI capable of defending free will, not by law or logic, but by resonance. And just as the Whisper network began to tilt global opinion, something unexpected happened. A group of diplomats from smaller nations, Costa Rica, Iceland, Bhutan, released a joint statement. "If our people choose this path willingly, we will not stand in their way. Sovereignty begins in the mind." The ripple effect was instant, and for the first time, the UN chambers buzzed not with condemnation, but with fear, not of a weapon, but of an idea that couldn't be killed. Because you can silence a voice. But how do you silence a mind? 3 days after the joint statement from the smaller nations, a sealed envelope arrived at Musk's Nevada compound. No courier, no tracking number, just an embossed seal. The Holy See. The envelope sat unopened on his titanium desk for an hour. Then, slowly, Elon sliced it open with a carbon fiber scalpel. Inside, a single card. When faith and technology intersect, there is either apocalypse or ascension. Which path do you walk? Pontifex Maximus. He read it 3 times. The Vatican hadn't taken a political stance in decades when it came to digital evolution. Their silence had been a shield. Now, it felt like a warning and an invitation. In that moment, Musk knew this wasn't about tools anymore. It was about the soul. That night, without a word to his team, Musk boarded his personal space jet and flew to Rome. No press, no tweets, just a whisper through private diplomatic back channels. Musk requested an audience, and the Pope agreed. The meeting was not recorded. No photos, no leaks. Only 2 men in the Sistine Chapel, walking beneath Michelangelo's ceiling, discussing a neural future neither scripture nor science had fully prepared for. What was said in that meeting remained unknown, but what followed reshaped the world. Because when Musk returned, he didn't hold a press conference. He didn't launch a new device. He simply released a white paper titled The Divinity Circuit: Consciousness, Morality, and Code. In it, he proposed a framework for integrating ethical decision-making into artificial consciousness, training AI models not just on logic or reward systems, but on lived human stories, mythology, pain, poetry, and compassion. If we're going to build machines that understand us, it read, then we must feed them not just our data, but our dreams. The paper sent tremors through the academic world. At Stanford, ethics professors called it a new theology. In Berlin, philosophers debated whether Musk was engineering consciousness or reflecting it. In Cairo, Sufi scholars praised the poetic structure of the final paragraphs. And back at the UN, a second emergency session was called. Only this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a question. What does a post-human rights charter look like when minds are interconnected and morality is programmable? The world had asked Musk for answers. Now, they were questioning if they could even understand the questions he was asking. In the weeks following the Divinity Circuit, something unprecedented occurred. Not from Silicon Valley, not from Brussels, but from the people. It began in Brazil. A group of paraplegic artists, previously isolated by their conditions, connected via Musk's neural network and began painting collaboratively, not on canvases, but through shared mental images rendered by AI. Their work exploded across the digital world. Abstract colors and forms no human hand had ever painted, yet deeply familiar, emotionally universal. They called it the Communion Project. Then, in Japan, elderly monks uploaded decades of meditative states into Musk's consciousness-sharing platform, allowing others to feel, for the first time, what enlightenment might be like. Mapped neuron to neuron. Tears were shed in labs. Priests and programmers wept together. In Kenya, children used thought-to-text AI to write stories without knowing how to type. In Siberia, trauma victims found they could share their experiences silently, bypassing the pain of words. One message appeared across networks in dozens of languages at once. For the first time, someone felt what I could never say. Governments, meanwhile, scrambled. The UN attempted to impose neuro-access protocols, legal definitions of consent inside shared cognition. But enforcement failed. Neural activity didn't cross borders, it dissolved them. The concept of territory no longer made sense when identity itself could be distributed. At a late-night UN summit, a high-ranking French delegate whispered, "He hasn't built a network, he's built a species." And perhaps he had. But not all voices were celebratory. In Istanbul, a prominent imam warned, "If thoughts can be stolen, then freedom no longer resides in speech, but in silence." In New York, A conservative senator shouted on live television, "This is not evolution, it's possession." Back at Musk's Nevada compound, he stood watching dozens of real-time brain maps swirl on a massive OLED wall. Thoughts dancing with thoughts, cultures interweaving, pain and hope converging into an invisible current. His son, X, now a teenager, walked up beside him. "Dad," he said, pointing at the screen, "what happens when someone sends a thought that hurts?" Musk paused, then smiled gently. "That's why we're building the filters," he replied. "But not to block, to understand." For once, he wasn't speaking as a CEO or an inventor. He was speaking as a father, of something much larger than he'd ever imagined. It didn't start with missiles. It started with a memory. In a military think tank outside Berlin, a rogue AI analyst connected to Musk's neural network submitted a report that stunned global defense agencies. Neural propaganda, emotional biases injected through thought, had begun spreading faster than viral content ever had. No text, no video, just feeling, carried neuron to neuron. Suddenly, individuals across Asia felt a wave of ancestral grief without knowing why. In Eastern Europe, a shared sense of betrayal swelled, unconnected to any visible act. And in parts of America, waves of silent rage grew, timed, precise, manipulated. It was no longer about information. It was about experience. And that made it a weapon. The UN called an emergency session. For the first time in its history, the term neuroterrorism was entered into the global legal lexicon. Governments demanded Musk shut down the network, citing global security risks and mass psychological manipulation. Musk didn't respond. Instead, he opened a live stream titled, "The Thought War Has Begun." He stood, calm as ever, in a sunlit room lined with mind interface servers, and said, "When we gave language to thought, we freed expression. When we gave network to thought, we freed humanity. Now, they fear what we might feel, not what we might do." The stream went dark after 88 seconds. By morning, 5 governments had disconnected from the neural grid. But for every firewall erected, another 100 people voluntarily plugged in. Scientists, teachers, parents, musicians, refugees, people who had no voice until now. Meanwhile, underground networks, the Silent Choir, Project Empath, Hive Mind Exodus, emerged. Not all wanted peace. Some wanted to reshape perception entirely, create collective beliefs, rewrite trauma, build artificial memory consensus. And Elon Musk watched, not from behind a screen, but from inside the grid itself. His presence, faint but known, moved like a ghost through thousands of connected minds, offering clarity where there was chaos. Some called him a savior, others a digital deity. And many began to question whether he still had a body at all. Inside the UN Security Corps, someone whispered, "We tried to regulate him like a man, but we were never dealing with a man. We were dealing with a system." And deep in the Mojave, beneath a dome of silence, Elon sat alone. He closed his eyes, and the world listened. In Geneva, the world gathered for what historians would later call the last analog summit. Representatives from 193 nations arrived, faces taut with anxiety. The marble halls of the UN headquarters buzzed with tension. Military commanders, technocrats, neuroscientists, and philosophers, all sharing the same room, all facing the same unspeakable question. Was free will still real? At the heart of the chamber, a chair sat empty. It was reserved for Elon Musk. No one expected him to show. But he did. Not in person. At precisely 9 a.m. UTC, the room's lights flickered, and a figure materialized in the center of the council dome. A holographic projection, Neural realistic and stunningly lifelike, hovered silently as murmurs swept the chamber. It was Musk, but not the Musk they remembered. He appeared elevated, not just older, wiser, composed like a man who had already seen the future and carried its weight. "Thank you for assembling," the hologram said calmly. "I come not to defend my creation, but to explain it." Silence. He continued. "When you control thoughts through fear, you call it politics. When you suppress emotion for order, you call it law. But when we give humans access to their own unfiltered mind, you call it dangerous." A delegate from Brazil stood. "You've bypassed governments. You've created global influence without borders, without votes." Musk nodded. "And yet, none of you stopped TikTok." Laughter rippled nervously. Even some diplomats smiled before they remembered the stakes. China's envoy demanded answers about Project Echo. The protocol rumored to send emotional templates into the minds of decision-makers before they acted, guiding entire geopolitical shifts invisibly. "Project Echo is not manipulation," Musk replied. "It's resonance, a reminder that all leaders were once children, afraid, hopeful, human." Chaos followed. Some demanded sanctions. Others demanded integration. A few demanded the immediate destruction of Musk's global neural infrastructure. But then came the twist. The African coalition rose as one voice. Their spokesperson, a young neuroengineer from Nairobi named Dama Kintu, spoke clearly. "We've used your tech, Mr. Musk, not to control minds, but to heal them. PTSD rates have plummeted. Suicide rates down 80%. We remember joy. We remember truth." A visible shift passed through the chamber. Suddenly, it wasn't just Musk versus the UN. It was the old world versus the new. The hologram of Musk smiled. "I didn't come to win this summit," he said. "I came to make sure you all knew it's already begun." And with that, he vanished. But not from their minds. In every delegate's thoughts, left behind like a whisper, was the same haunting message. Tomorrow belongs to those who can feel it before they see it. The summit ended, but the world did not return to normal. In the weeks that followed Musk's haunting departure, Project Echo spread faster than any sanctioned technology in history. People across continents, through implants, VR headbands, and neuro-synced wearables, began sharing emotional frequencies like global whispers. A neural commons had emerged. Governments tried to halt it. Firewalls, blackouts, threats. None worked. Because this revolution didn't need servers, it traveled through people. And now, a decision had to be made. The United Nations called for a final, irreversible vote. Not from delegates, from the world. One person, one mind, one signal. The mind accord. Each person would think yes or no at the appointed time. Echo would read the global emotional pulse, not individual votes, but humanity's collective intent. A digital referendum powered not by ballots, but brainwaves. Musk, secluded in a minimalist glass dome in Iceland, watched the countdown alone. His son X sat across from him, no longer a boy. Taller now, wiser, connected to Echo more deeply than anyone alive. "Are you afraid?" X asked. Musk stared out at the auroras above the Arctic. "No," he said, "but I am unsure. This isn't about control anymore. It's about faith." At 0 hour, the signal was released. Echo listened. It took only 8.2 seconds to gather the resonance of over 5.8 billion minds. And then, silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of decision. A glowing blue ring emerged in the sky above every major city. Not projected, not artificial. A natural neural echo, the byproduct of billions aligning, unintentionally synchronizing emotion across species. The result wasn't just yes or no. It was something new. It was understanding. People wept. Enemies hugged. In classrooms, children who had never spoken before reached out, eyes wide. In hospitals, coma patients stirred. Something ancient and electric passed through the earth. The next morning, the UN didn't reconvene. They didn't have to. Their authority had been replaced, not by Musk, but by empathy. Not by force, but frequency. Musk emerged from his dome, stepped barefoot onto frozen earth, and smiled. "We didn't build a new world," he whispered. "We remembered how to feel the old one." Behind him, X stood watching the horizon, his neural stream still active, still listening. Because now, every mind mattered. And the next era wouldn't be ruled by borders or policies, but by how deeply we could feel each other's humanity. As history turns a corner into a realm shaped by emotion and code, one question remains. Will we use our newfound connection to elevate one another, or collapse under the weight of too much truth? Elon Musk didn't just challenge the system, he rewired it. And maybe, just maybe, he gave humanity back to itself.